South Africa will send a high-level delegation to the U.S. within the next 2 weeks. That's as the country plans to lobby against Washington enacting legislation for a full review of relations between the two countries. U.S.-SA relations have been marked by tension for the past 2 years, sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. and European governments are conducting an intensive campaign to rally African governments to oppose Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. But South Africa has chosen to remain non-aligned. Markets expect the Reserve Bank to hold rates at the monetary policy's upcoming meeting. That's despite positive changes to the outlook. Since the committee's last meeting, the rand has strengthened and inflation expectations have moderated. But participants believe the SARB will stick to its goal of bringing inflation to its target of 4.5% before considering a cut. The Transport Ministry is looking to extend private sector participation in the rail network. In her budget vote speech, Minister Barbara Creecy revealed plans to establish a dedicated unit to pursue this goal and said the division would have the necessary skills and expertise in the design, negotiation and contracting of projects to seek private sector involvement. Its main role would be to identify suitable areas of private sector participation in rail and ports. The JSE may soon have to bid farewell to BAL Equipment. Investment holding company IAB plans to buy the company, and this will result in it delisting. IAB already holds just over 70% of BAL Equipment and will offer 53 Rand cash per share to shareholders to get the deal across the line. This is a 71% premium to the closing price of BAL Equipment's shares. Sappi has inked a deal to sell Laum Mill. The paper and packaging group stopped production at the site in Belgium at the end of last year and now has found a buyer. A privately owned Dutch firm, UTB, will buy the asset for 50 million euros. 40 million euros of that will be paid in cash. The transaction is unconditional and is expected to close during October. Sasin may also be leaving the JSE. The financial services group has made a delisting proposal to shareholders, offering minority shareholders 30 Rand per share. That's a 65% premium to the 30-day volume-weighted average. The company's two largest shareholders, Unitas and Wiphold, are funding the offer. Sasin CEO Michael Sasin says the transactions are the next step in its strategic reset and that the aim is to simplify the group by backing its core businesses and unlocking value for shareholders. Further afield, China's economy grew much slower than anticipated in the second quarter. This due to an extended property slump and job insecurity, which hindered a fragile recovery and sustained expectations. Here's more detail in this package report.
China's economy grew much slower than expected in the second quarter, dragged down by a prolonged property crisis and job insecurity despite a strong beginning to the year. It's led to expectations that Beijing may need to unleash even more stimulus. Official data showed the world's second largest economy grew at 4.7%, the slowest since the first quarter of 2023 and missing a 5.1% forecast. The years-long property downturn deepened in June as new home prices fell at the fastest pace in 9 years. Particular worry surrounds growth in retail. Businesses were forced to slash prices on everything from clothes to cars under deflationary pressure. Analysts say to expect cutting debt and boosting confidence to be the main focus at this week's third-party plenum, a key economic meeting that happens every 5 years. The government has been aiming for economic growth of 5% in 2024, a target that many think is too ambitious. To counteract weak domestic demand and property problems, China has already increased infrastructure investment and is focusing on high-tech manufacturing. Though now analysts at Citi, polled by Reuters, say they expect further measures to support property are coming after a meeting of the Politburo later this month.
And the Paris Olympics are now less than 2 weeks away, and several major airlines are anticipating a negative impact on their revenue due to the event. Let's cross over to our reporter, Anati Ndevu, with more. Anati.
And that's right, Ndawling. With the Paris Olympics just around the corner, some big airlines are saying that the event might lead to a drop in their revenue. And joining me now to explain how this could be the case is DW correspondent Emily Lishner, who is currently standing by in Berlin. Emily, thank you so much for your time. Maybe you can start off by telling us how an event that's expected to draw big crowds to Paris can negatively impact airlines.
Thanks for having me. Well, it may seem counterintuitive at first, but the reality is that while the Olympic Games is expected to draw somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million people to Paris, most tourists and travelers are going to try to avoid the city during this 2-week period of the Olympics. A lot more of them are going to avoid it than go to Paris. And they're likely to choose another European city or just visit Paris after the Games in late August and September when they know that they can avoid the excessive crowds and the high prices. I mean, one data firm expects hotel rooms to cost as much as 45% more on average during the Olympics. And so tourists avoiding Paris is why Delta is saying that it's expecting to take a loss of revenue of around 100 million euro. And that's a big hit, but Delta says that it is confident that it can recuperate that loss in the preceding few months because in general, summer travel demand has been strong, which has been built up post the pandemic. In June, Delta generated revenue that was nearly 5.5% higher than it did last year in June of 2023. And so that means that last June, their operating revenue was around 15.5 billion euros. So a loss of 100 million euro isn't going to break their bank. They'll just have to make up for it later.
And Emily, are they the only ones reporting a projected hit to their revenue?
They're not. At the start of the month, the Air France KLM group, they also reported that the Paris Olympics was going to have a blow to their revenue, even one that's bigger than Delta. It's somewhere between 160 and 100 million euro from June until August. Now, Air France is the official airline for the Games. And they also estimate that 20% of the Olympic athletes traveling to France will be flying Air France. Mainly, these are athletes from Brazil, the U.S., Italy, and Japan. But together, Delta and Air France have approximately 70% market share in nonstop service between the U.S. and France.
Emily, what about the cost to the city of Paris as a result of the Olympics? It's easy to think about the tourists that are generating money for the economy, but talk to us about the money coming out of Paris for this event.
That's a good question. I mean, there are always people who are quick to point out that big sporting events like the Olympic Games or the Euro 2024 Cup that just wrapped up in Berlin this weekend, that they're good for a city's economy because it attracts tourists and even some investors. But more often than not, these events are a financial drain on the host cities. A lot of the infrastructure that's built isn't going to be repurposed after the Games have ended. And as for the sports venues that will remain, the city will have to spend funding on maintenance for years to come. And the cost of hosting the Olympics has just skyrocketed in recent decades. In 2004, the Games in Atlanta cost almost $19 billion. And then in Beijing, just 4 years later, that cost amounted to over $52 billion. And in Paris, around 3 billion euro of the Olympic funding came from is coming from public taxpayers. But these taxpayers, even if they're working at a venue that might get a boost in revenue during the Games, they aren't likely to see a boost in salary for their period they're working or even long term.
Emily, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for that update. That was DW's Emily Lishner.